First of all, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us here. We will have about a 20 minutes talk from Shawn Yeager, the VP of Sales of Dataswift. He will talk to us about how to engage customers in the ethical data economy, which will be very, very interesting. He'll talk about 20 minutes and then we'll have a Q&A for 10 minutes just after that. I will explain a little bit more. Welcome, Shawn, and looking forward.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Teresa. So welcome, everyone. As Teresa noted, I'm Shawn Yeager, VP of Sales for Dataswift, and appreciate you taking the time today. I know that most of us spend our days staring at Zoom screens, so we're grateful that you've chosen to add one more session to your roster. As Teresa noted, I'll be sharing our views and findings about what we call the ethical data economy and what we believe it means for how organizations from startups to global enterprises will need to manage personal data. And after that talk, we'll open up the call for Q&A and discussion. So to begin and to frame the conversation, we believe that within the next decade, every application and website on the planet will change how it stores user data. We know this is a bold claim. And the reason is we've all seen these headlines. We can collect these day to day, from the latest data breach from one that comes to mind is a very large global hotel chain, to some would argue systemic misuse of user data by so-called big tech. The bottom line is today's customers and users simply do not trust how most tech companies, and more so how most brands, handle their personal data. And so now more than ever, trust is everything. And we don't just mean that in the abstract. In very practical terms, we see that trust drives consent and consent drives revenue. So there is absolutely a direct correlation. How did we get here? Well, I would argue that it was a very natural but now problemsome collect it all approach to data. These data lakes that we build, they serve to deliver insights and target audiences, but big data now comes with big problems. Whether it is the ability to de-anonymize and to re-identify, this presents certain compliance and privacy risks. Or on the flip side, if individuals cannot be re-identified, we have usability risks. The data set is effectively less usable and less valuable, but either way, combined, we have firms facing these risks and having to decide somehow in between what is the tolerance that they're willing to take for the value they can derive from their data. And then, of course, as the data set grows, as the data lakes grow, that risk increases cumulatively. And more importantly, it's just not how we build trust. So to better frame the problem, we are looking at data as a new asset class, and specifically personal data. So increased regulation is driving this. We can't just treat it as simply an internal asset that we drive revenue, insights, value from, but rather that we have to treat it truly as an asset class. And then what that means is we need to categorize. We will joke somewhat internally that we need a sorting hat for Harry Potter fans to determine whether that personal data is toxic or tame. Now, the typical approach to this is one that we think is important to call out, is to lock it down. And our view is that when you reduce the mobility of data, you reduce its value. And so it's very important to treat personal data in a way that's ethical, in a way that builds trust, but to be able to continue to have and increase, in fact, the liquidity of that data to drive more and better revenue. Now, either way you slice it, most organizations are in a very challenging position with regard to global frameworks, with regard to compliance and the legal treatment of privacy and data. And so that drives up legal costs and compliance costs. And ultimately where we end up is, what does the future look like? How should we treat personal data? How should we position ourselves and equip ourselves to be compliant, and better yet, to get ahead of what we see coming from the likes of, here in the US, the California Consumer Privacy Act. One example here in the States is that as of January, there were 700 state-level pieces of legislation being proposed to deal with privacy. So it is a thicket, very challenging to manage. And I think it's reasonable to say that it's nearly impossible to comply with these in a piecemeal fashion. So the alternative that we see and that we're proposing is a framework we call Decode. And that is simply referring to defiant, compliant, trustworthy, and ethical. And so what do we mean by this? Well, at the base of the triangle are those companies who are defiant. They will do things like jurisdictional arbitrage. They'll move data around on content distribution networks and other mechanisms to effectively sidestep legislation that is privacy and data protection frameworks. Now, the next step up the ladder or up the pyramid is compliance. And so what does that mean? Well, we all know, right? We've got the thumbs up from the legal department. Now, the challenge here is we would argue that compliance is the new just barely enough, right? To say that one is compliant is, frankly, to say we've done just barely enough. What it doesn't do is it doesn't allow an organization, an enterprise, or a startup to step forward and say that trust and privacy by design are a pillar of the brand, right? Which we think is very important. And as I noted before, is what drives revenue ultimately through consent. Now, the top of the pyramid, and we see this as really more an emergent behavior of a system like this, is that when we treat data in a way that is preserving and considering rather the dignity of the individual whose data we treat, then we've emerged as an ethical personal data entity or someone who treats data in an ethical fashion. So more specifically, to make this a bit more concrete, and you'll see more from us over time, is the Decode data framework. And so to those of you who work in data, this will be pretty straightforward. For those perhaps who are not doing this day to day, we see these four pillars of collection, storage, processing, and sharing as the key areas in which organizations need to grade effectively themselves and to determine how far forward they wish to be. And so I won't take you through all of these in detail. You will have the recording of this call for reference, or rather from this webinar. But this is, I wanted to give you a sneak peek of the framework that we're developing. There'll be a series of tools, including a self-assessment tool and a survey that you'll be able to deploy internally to grade and to score yourselves as a firm. But really, these are the areas that we see organizations paying attention to and beginning to better understand how they move up this ladder to trustworthy and ultimately ethical. Now, what this means is that there is a current state and a future state that we can look at, right? So on the x-axis or at the bottom is data exposure, which really is a reference to how highly exposed are we based on the amount of data that we collect about our customers and about our users. And then on the y-axis, from low to high, is the position that we wish to take regarding rights and dignity of the user. Now, that may sound a bit high-minded to some of us, but I think really it is ultimately how we're able to differentiate ourselves in terms of how we deal with customers, consumers, users. And so from what we would call unambitious, which is we probably are not using data strategically to drive our products, to drive our user engagement, our customer engagement, to drive revenue. If we are doing that in a way that's minimal, there are certain industries that, that are still going through so-called digital transformation. And if we really just kind of don't care, then that's an unambitious position. If we have a certain sort of philosophical posture, but we again aren't using data strategically, then we tongue-in-cheek call that turtling. And then I think the rest are fairly straightforward, from again doing just barely enough in terms of compliance to moving up and to the right to ethical. Now, what this means is a future where we're co-creating value. And I think this is worth pausing for a moment and really discussing in a bit more detail, because it is, for many of us, not a natural place to be, because we're used to enterprise-owned or centralized data. We're used to, as I mentioned before, collecting it all, owning it all, and being able to drive insights and engagement and develop product and generate revenue in a way where it's all in our control. So the future we see, and not all of us, will be ready for this, but we think it is what's coming over time, is a marriage of data at the center and data at the edge, whereby enterprises and individuals co-create. So another way of looking at this is moving from a system whereby we read data from a data lake, we make those internal inquiries to our data systems, to where we query at scale individuals who have possession of their own personal data. So an example that we have going live very soon is in insurance. And I use this to illustrate, depending on your industry, I think, or rather regardless of the industry, I think we can appreciate this example as an individual. So if we're going to shop for new insurance, that might be for homeowners, that might be for automotive, it might be for life insurance, whatever it is, there will soon be scenarios where one can opt in, can be prompted. So I'm shopping for insurance. I'm on XYCo's website, InsureCo's website, and I'm prompted, Shawn, we think there's an alternative way to score risk and to present a better price to you for your premium. Would you like to do so? And so I simply comply with that, or rather consent to that, I should say. It goes and spins up a personal data account for me, pulls my data from Facebook, pulls my data from Fitbit, runs a computation at the edge, not at the center, and returns a composite risk score to the insurance company. So what has happened here is it has made use of my personal data, it's made use of my Facebook data, it's made use of my Fitbit data, but it has not shared that underlying data with the insurance company. So again, we have a partner building that right now. It's about to go live and will be available, and that's just one of many use cases. And so that is an act of co-creation. I have consented to allow an algorithm to run on a container that I own that holds my personal data, and it returns that score and then gives me value, right, in the form of a discounted or lower premium. And so that's an example of the sort of co-creation that we're talking about. And we see that as the inevitable future. Now, the other thing this does, which is very important, I think, is though it may be uncomfortable for some of us who have, developed systems over years or decades where we own all of the data and have full control, is we now have creative ways to share that data within an ecosystem and as an organization to create new revenue streams. And so what we see that looking like is a shift from left to right. And so typically firms are used to capturing value in a certain way. And that is to say that we aggregate individual private value into a public or societal grouping. And so that's the diagram here. And then the firm captures that, right? And I think that again is not, there's no value judgment here. It's not right or wrong, but I think what most individuals have come to see, and it's easy to pick on Facebook, but let's use Facebook for a moment. As the saying goes, if the product is free, you are the product, right? And I think there is an awareness among consumers, among users, among customers that they've gotten the short end of this deal. And so the shift we see is to decentralized data storage and processing systems, whereby the public and societal value is the larger grouping, and that firms will certainly still be able to capture and create and share value, but there's an aggregate here that the sum is greater, rather the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so the overlapping segment here at the center of this Venn diagram on the right is to say that firms will share the personal data that we as individuals own and choose to share back with them. And so again, this overlap creates a lot of positive new revenue streams, new economic models. There's a lot more to be said about this, and we will in future webinars, but I just wanted to really leave you with this sort of key concept that we see coming is the shift from left to right in the way value is captured and created. So with that, and I think we've moved through a bit faster perhaps than expected, but it gives us more time for Q&A. I wanted to tell you just very briefly about Dataswift. So Dataswift enables everyone from large organizations to startups and individuals in the ethical data economy, as we call it, to give, take, and use data responsibly. Our mission is to enable organizations to give back control, build on better foundations, and in some cases, rebuild relationships with consumers and users. And so following today, as we mentioned, you'll have a recording of this webinar and would love to also invite you to future events. And having signed up today, you'll receive those. You can also follow along at dataswift.io/events. And certainly, if you'd like to have a conversation about how Dataswift can help you design and build new solutions to give, take, and use data responsibly, feel free to follow this link to book a call, and we'd love to have a conversation with you. With that, I think we'll turn it over for Q&A.
That's great. Thank you so much, Shawn. That was great. Yeah, so for the Q&A, if you would like to ask something, you can put it in the chat down below, or you can do a reaction, I'll do it right here, a little thumbs up or a little clap, and then you can unmute yourselves and ask Shawn the question directly. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please.
Hey, Shawn, it's Carrie. Long time no speak, my friend.
Oh, wow, Carrie. How you doing,
Thanks.
buddy?
I'm doing well, thanks. Hopefully you are as well in these crazy times. Thanks for the presentation. I think it's pretty interesting how consumers are starting to hopefully be able to take power back in their own data. One of the things I think I heard you say is just sort of the collection of the data from the consumers. How do you feel that organizations are going to be able to collect that data and maintain the trust that giving over data they wouldn't otherwise give to organizations is going to be treated the right way?
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. And Carrie and I go way back, although we haven't spoken in a long time, so I did not slip him $20 to plant that question. But I'm delighted he asked it, because it does allow me to shamelessly talk a little bit about Dataswift, which we don't want to do a plug here, but you know, it does go to the core of why we exist, Carrie, which is, without talking too much about technology, the Dataswift product, the Dataswift solution, is about delivering a legally owned cloud-based microserver, right? So that's a mouthful. But the bottom line is, what we, through these personal data accounts that we and our partners issue, is we provide storage, computation, and contracting to the individual without them having to know what any of that means. So we have, as an individual, we end up with a so-called personal data account where that data is stored. It can be computed on and ultimately contracted and licensed back to an enterprise. And we have full legal ownership. Now that will, perhaps not for anyone on the call, but that will send ripples of fear through certain hallways, in the sense of, it is a shift in control. But to your question, what it does is it changes from, I, an enterprise, need to be concerned about breaches and concerned about compliance and concerned about legality, to I participate in an ecosystem where individuals legally own and give consent to compute on and can contract or license data back to multiple organizations. And then I, as the enterprise, have effectively pushed all of that back to the individual. And I don't want to say it's as simple as I don't have to worry about it, but effectively it's I don't have to worry about it, because that data is yours. Now, I need to query it. I need to, more specifically, I need to present an opportunity and a value to you as an individual. But assuming I can do so effectively, then that data is shared with me, and I kind of go about the traditional operation of my business.
Interesting. So effectively, Dataswift is recruiting the consumers to be able to provide their data and then either directly repackaging it to sell to the enterprises on behalf of the consumer or in conjunction with the consumer, and or allowing access to it to run, like you said, algorithms to determine intents, I guess, and other things.
Very close. And the key difference, however, is that we are an infrastructure company. The individual in actual fact owns the container. So they own this server in the cloud. Again, they don't need to think about it as a server. For those of us like Carrie and I that are in technology, we think about it that way, but they just know that they have legal ownership to their personal data. So we as Dataswift are merely providing that infrastructure, and our partners, much like a credit card company and a bank, are issuers of credit cards to you. So, you get your credit card, it says Bank ABC, but it's MasterCard, Visa, American Express.
Right.
So a personal data account can be issued in the same way. Ultimately, however, we as individuals own that. So it is the individual who's contracting to provide data back. It's not Dataswift and it's not the enterprise.
Nice.
Shawn, it's Jason.
Hey, Jason.
Good to catch up. Just a quick question, just following on from Kerry's question, I think, which is, we know it's always difficult when you're the small player contracting with a big player, whether that's a small business or an individual. So what if the organizations that you want to transact with will not accept your license terms on the basis of the sharing of the data? How do we get around that?
So great question. And I don't know that we do have, I'm looking to see if we have James, our counsel, on the call to give a better answer. But I will say that it is Dataswift's position, and we don't presume, to have it, to have the only right answer, but it is our position, and 7 years previous to Dataswift of various academic and other institutions coming together to build a legal and governance framework. Long answer to a short question is, with all of that work, with all of that collaboration, we certainly feel strongly that we have struck the right balance. Now, we do have the HCF, the HAT Community Foundation, and HAT is a reference to another sort of product or technology, rather, that underlies what Dataswift provides. But the HAT Community Foundation oversees all of this and governs and balances those interactions. So the shorter answer is, we in issuing personal data accounts and in individuals conducting business with an entity, the terms are the terms that we think best represent the balance of needs between individual and enterprise. It will evolve over time, and we take feedback, of course, in that process. But I want to underscore in short that it is not a negotiation on the spot, right? It is a consent and informed consent-driven transaction in what we would like to think is a lightly regulated free market of personal data. So long answer, complex issue. And again, we believe we've struck the right balance, but we're always learning and evolving.
Yes, we have another question from John Ruffley. Thank you so much, John. That is, to what extent do you believe customers place trust in the brand values of a company and how they behave versus the tech?
Great question. Thank you, John. And I think, our observation, and we are, I think, observers in this through certainly in my role in sales, having the opportunity to speak to lots and lots of brands, large and small, is what has been fascinating and really encouraging for me. My personal opinions are not terribly relevant, but I, as I often say, am a raging digital civil liberties advocate. And so I can't help but be delighted when I see companies step forward and say, we want to build trust into our brand values, and we want to have trust as a pillar of our brand. And so I think of one particular very large retail brand who at the CEO level has said that is a key way that they will differentiate, right? So their treatment of personal data is core to the brand values that they wish to communicate. another in financial services, and a few actually in financial services, where we have heard and learned from them that at the board level, the communication and the marching orders, if you will, are find ways to embody more trust and to rebuild trust. And so to your question, John, I think there's a terrific opportunity for, let's say, non-tech brands to lead here. I think Silicon Valley, as representative of big tech, has a lot of work to do to repair that trust. And I think those outside of technology have a tremendous opportunity to step into that void and take a leadership position.
Great, thank you so much, Shawn. Does anyone else have any questions that they would like to ask? I think we might be good. 3:32, my God, or 2:32 for UK. Perfectly on the spot. All right, Shawn, do you want to have the...
Yeah, just to say thank you so much to everyone for attending. I know, again, it's a very strange time, and I sincerely hope that you and yours are keeping well. And I know that there are a lot of things fighting for your time. We appreciate you sharing some of us with us today. Hope it's been valuable. And again, would love to speak with you and see you on future webinars as you're able. Thanks so much and have a great day.